All right. I know I'm going to trigger every single Gemini or ENTJ out there, and that's totally fine with me. My best friends in high school, Geminis. I have battled a Gemini in court for the last, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, seems like forever. You love me or you hate me. That is totally fine. All right. So I'm going to introduce myself. I am getting tired and just a wee little cocky, but it's hard not to with the ENTJs. Y'all are fun. Don't get me wrong. All right. So my name is Heather, and this channel is called Underwater Panther. The work I do here sits at the intersection of astro-psychology, moral cognition, shadow integration, and cultural power dynamics. I run multiple long form series exploring how different minds processes values, identity, authority, relationships, and meaning across astrology, psychology, generational dynamics, culture, psyche, and consciousness. So, we are talking about ranking the most masculine to the most feminine archetypes through the 12 personality types. Before I show this ranking, I need to slow the room down for a moment. Good luck. Good luck with that with Gemini. All right. So, this is not a ranking of worth, morality, intelligence, or superiority. This is a ranking of which archetypes naturally lead with masculine function versus feminine function under pressure. When I say masculine, I mean structure, direction, boundaries, responsibility, consequence, and containment. When I say feminine, I mean integration, attunement, relational intelligence, meaning making, and emotional continuity. For every archetype carries both. But every archetype has a default lead function, especially when systems destabilize. And here's the critical point: when an archetype is forced to lead from its non native polarity, it doesn't become balanced. It becomes overextended, distorted, or resentful. So, as we move from the most masculine leading to the most feminine leading, we are not moving from strong to weak. We're moving from structure first minds to connection first minds, each carrying moral weight differently and each breaking it differently when overloaded. With that clarification, let's look at what healthy versus distorted masculine and feminine actually look like. So I'm going to run through the list quickly and then I'm going to pull up your key card. So, number one, most masculine, Capricorn or the ISTJ due to Saturn containment and consequence. Number two, Aries, the ESTP, Mars initiation and force of action. Number three, Aquarius or the INTJ, structural ethics and systems orientation. Number four, Leo or the ESFP, visible leadership and morale direction. Number five, Sagittarius, ISTP, meaning, direction, and doctrine pressure. Number six, Virgo or the ESFJ, standardization, corrective containment. Number seven, Scorpio or the ENFP, power containment internally, control risk when split. Number eight, Gemini, androgynous bridge, oscillates, can look masculine when detached and feminine when attuned. Number nine, Taurus, the ESTJ, yin, stable but outwardly quiet authority through consistency. Number 10, Libra, the ENTP, relational governance, harmony first outwardly. Number 11, Cancer, the ENFJ, protective containment but feminine leading via emotional safety. And Pisces, the INFJ, disillusion, unity, and compassion first. So, Gemini, the neutral androgynous bridge. You are the twins. I have been studying the polarity topic for over 10 years now. And most people would rank you top three masculine. And I used to do that as well. But I have certainly changed my mind. And let's get into it. The translator of reality. Why Gemini is ranked eighth. Cognition comes after power. Language follows truth. Gemini does not appear early in the sequence because language cannot precede reality. Something must already exist to be named. Before Gemini can do its work, Something must already exist to talk about. Structure must be holding. Action must be stabilized. Systems must be intelligible. Morale must be alive. Meaning must orient behavior. Systems must function. And shadow must be integrated. So before Gemini, we have structures with Capricorn, action stabilized with Aries, systems coherence, Aquarius, morale with Leo, meaning orientation with Sagittarius, systems functioning with Virgo, and shadow integration with Scorpio. Only then does information matter. Gemini does not create reality. Gemini interprets it. Its role is to take lived reality with all its contradictions, tensions, and power dynamics and render it into language that can be shared without distortion. Where Capricorn stabilizes, Aries moves, Aquarius redesigns, Leo animates, Sagittarius orients, Virgo repairs, and Scorpio exposes, Gemini steps in after and asks, how do we talk about what's real without distorting it? When Gemini leads too early, reality dissolves into noise. Words multiply faster than truth can stabilize. Perspectives proliferate without coherence. Language becomes entertainment instead of orientation. But when Gemini leads at the right moment, understanding becomes possible. Translation replaces fragmentation. Dialogue prevents collapse into a single story line thinking. Coherent language prevents reality from hardening into propaganda or dissolving into chaos. Gemini is not the builder. Gemini is not the judge. Gemini is the bridge. Core function, how Gemini is built. So Gemini is an air sign. Oh crap, I forgot to put your key card up here. I do apologize. Give me 1 second. It's been a very, very long night. All right, there is your key card. Let me dial that down a wee little. All right, there we go. All right, core function, how Gemini is built. So Gemini is an air sign, intellectual, with a mixed androgynous polarity. It does not consistently lead with masculine force or feminine attunement. Instead, it oscillates between the two depending on context, audience, and informational need. This makes Gemini difficult to categorize and indispensable. Driven by Mercury, with a cognitive architecture, introverted intuition, and extroverted thinking, Gemini's power is not force, control, charisma, or depth. Its power is coherent transmission. Gemini leads with internal convergence with NI, compressing reality into a clear through line, and follows with external articulation, TE, translating that through line into language others can actually use. Under pressure, Gemini does not explore endlessly. It converges meaning internally, selects precise language, stabilizes interpretation, prevents truth from fragmenting or being hijacked. Gemini's function is not to ask infinite questions. Its real question under stress is, what is this actually pointing to? When integrated, Gemini speaks after synthesis and becomes one of the most stabilizing forces in the system. When split, Gemini speaks before synthesis and loses credibility not because it lies, but because it speaks too soon. Moral load, what Gemini carries. Gemini carries epistemic responsibility, not moral relativism. Its burden is not the ability to entertain endless perspectives, nor the impulse to remain neutral for neutrality's sake. They are absolutely notorious for standing on top of the fence, taking everyone's side, being on everyone's side when they're really not. A Gemini's burden is far heavier and far less comfortable. It must discern which patterns actually matter and which streams of information stabilize reality rather than distort it. Where other archetypes carry emotional structure or moral weight, Gemini carries the weight of knowing what is real enough to act on. Gemini's moral load, therefore, diagnostic, not expressive. It's tasked with recognizing the underlying structures that repeat across conflicting narratives, tracking how stories evolve over time, and identifying where truth fractures under pressure. Through NI, Gemini perceives long range patterns, causal chains, and future implications. Through TE, it determines which data is actionable, verifiable, and structurally relevant rather than merely persuasive or emotionally resonant. Gemini does not exist to generate more discourse. It generates to translate complexity into frameworks that can actually be used. This is why Gemini does not ask, "What else could this be?" That question belongs to exploratory cognition. Gemini instead asks, "What is the point to, and what must be done with it?" Gemini's ethics are neither emotional nor ideological. They are functional, they are governed by questions such as what information clarifies reality rather than obscuring it, what information destabilizes systems or inflames distortion, what framing preserves coherence instead of amplifying chaos. This is why Gemini can feel unsettling to people who crave certainty before understanding. Gemini refuses premature conclusions, not because it doubts truth, but because truth that is not properly structured cannot be acted upon without causing harm. How Gemini resists and fails identity capture. Gemini resists identity capture through pattern detection and systems logic. It does not fuse easily with belief systems because its cognition is not anchored to loyalty, belonging, or symbolic identity. Through NI, Gemini sees where narratives inevitably break down over time, where internal contradictions emerge, where promised outcomes fail to materialize, and where ideological coherence collapses under real world conditions. Through TE, Gemini tests claims against results rather than intentions, outcomes rather than rhetoric. This makes Gemini deeply skeptical of slogans, emotional contagion, and symbolic performance that lacks operational grounding. It is not moved by how passionately something is believed, only by whether it works, endures, and remains internally consistent across time. However, Gemini's vulnerability is often misunderstood. Its instability does not come from overstimulation by options or curiosity overload. That is NE language, not NITE. Gemini becomes unstable when the information environment itself collapses. Specifically, Gemini destabilizes when systems produce contradictory signals simultaneously, authority structures lose legitimacy, information is weaponized faster than it can be verified or contextualized. When this happens, Gemini's NI loses temporal anchoring. It can no longer reliably project futures, and TE loses enforcement power. It can no longer translate insight into structure or action. At this point, objectivity hardens into detachment. Discernment turns into withdrawal. When overwhelmed, Gemini does not fragment into many selves. It withholds commitment until coherence returns. This is not indecision. It is strategic non alignment under insufficient or corrupted data. What collapses when shared reality disappears? Gemini requires shared epistemic infrastructure to function. There must be at least minimal agreement around evidence, verification, institutional trust, and casual reasoning. Without these, Gemini cannot perform its core role because there is no stable signal left to translate. When shared reality collapses, Gemini faces an impossible task. Without epistemic agreement, NI detects too many incompatible futures at once. TE cannot prioritize action without risking distortion. Language loses its functional purpose and becomes performative. At this stage, Gemini may appear cold, ironic, or disengaged, not because it lacks care, but because acting on incoherent data would epistemically would be epistemically irresponsible. This is where modern distortions emerge. Optics replace outcomes, rhetoric replaces structure, persuasion replaces truth testing. Gemini is not meant to amplify noise. It is meant to stabilize understanding. When that is no longer possible, Gemini suspects output rather than participate in distortion. Silence in this context is not avoidance, it is containment. Split risk, pattern without authority. Gemini's split does not manifest as many selves. Instead, it manifests as pattern recognition without authority. This split appears as accurate insight without enforcement power, clarity without institutional backing, truth without permission to act on. Here, NI sees the problem clearly, often long before others do, but TE cannot implement the solution because the surrounding system will not support it. The result is not deception, it is containment without leverage. Gemini withdraws intellectually. It becomes strategically silent. It maintains observational distance that others misinterpret as detachment or apathy. When Gemini loses its center, truth is still seen, but it is no longer spoken with force. Language becomes precise, careful, and restrained. Commitment is delayed until conditions support effectiveness rather than punishment. Masculine versus feminine expression. So I'm actually, okay, yeah. All right, so masculine leaning expression, Gemini manifests as strategic clarity, communication is precise, corrective, and outcome oriented. This Gemini critiques systems, identifies inefficiencies, and reframes conversation towards function rather than sentiment. People often feel mentally oriented in this presence, but also corrected or slightly exposed. Gemini here sees what others missed and names it cleanly. Shadow expressions include bluntness, emotional minimalism, and appearing dismissive of subjective experience, not out of cruelty, but out of prioritization. Feminine leaning expression. In its feminine leaning expression, Gemini emphasizes pattern synthesis and contextual intelligence. It translates between groups, stabilizes discourse through explanation, and helps others locate themselves within complex systems. People feel clarified, oriented, and supported without emotional fusion or dependency. Gemini offers understanding without absorption. Shadow expressions includes over responsibility for coherence, self-silencing to maintain neutrality, and withholding conviction until perfect clarity appears. So core tension, truth without structure creates chaos, structure without truth creates propaganda. Gemini stands precisely at the fault line between the two. So now let's get into the planetary and cognitive architecture. So psychologically, we have the hero, parent, child, and inferior. Astrologically, we have the ruler, exaltation, left field, and fall. So Gemini's ego is not exploratory, it is directive. Its cognition moves from orientation. So we also have the North Node and the South Node here, which no other astrologer talks about, but it is a thing. I also combine that in with Sagittarius. So I get a little deep. All right. So its cognition moves from future orientation, North Node, into execution, TE, grounded by real world input and restrained by karmic value memory. This makes Gemini a strategic translator, not a brainstormer. NI and Mercury, ego core pattern convergence. Gemini's core cognition tracks long range meaning, identifies casual through lines, and anticipates system outcomes. Healthy, this produces foresight, synthesis, and strategic clarity. Shadow, it leads to withdrawal, fatalism, or over containment of insight. TE and Mercury, structural translation. Gemini's hero function organizes information into usable frameworks, tests truth through results, prioritizes function over sentiment. Healthy, this creates execution and epistemic leadership. Shadow, it can become rigid, impatient with emotion, or overly efficient driven. TE Hero and Mercury, the executive translation structural command. So, Gemini's dominant conscious function is extroverted thinking, ruled and amplified by Mercury. This is where Gemini leads. TE does not speculate, it organizes. It converts information into systems, procedures, hierarchies, and executable frameworks. Mercury gives speed, articulation, and precision. TE gives authority and direction. This function is why Gemini naturally corrects faulty logic, reframes discussion towards outcomes, prioritizes what works over what feels good, speaks in terms of efficiency, causality, and structure. Healthy expression, Gemini becomes an epistemic leader, not by charisma, but by clarity. It names problems accurately and builds solutions others can actually use. Shadow expression, when overextended, TE can become blunt, impatient with emotion, or dismissive of subjective experience. Gemini may appear cold when it is simply prioritizing function. TE is Gemini's voice of command. Now we have NI parent in the North Node, future orientation, and pattern responsibility. Gemini's guiding intelligence is introverted intuition, fused with the North Node. This means Gemini is oriented towards what is forming, not what has been. NI sees long range consequences, emerging trajectories, structural weak points before collapse, and where systems are headed if left unchecked. The North Node makes this non optional. Gemini is karmically tasked with moving forward, not circulating familiar ground. It is here to grow into foresight, not repetition. NI does not flood Gemini with options, it converges them. Healthy expression, Gemini demonstrates strategic patience, timing, and clarity about where effort should be applied. It waits not out of indecision, but because it sees when action will matter. Shadow expression, when burdened by responsibility without support, Gemini may withdraw or over contain insight, delaying action until conditions feel structurally viable. So, Gemini is accountable for the future. So now we have extroverted sensing child and Jupiter in left field. Real world input. Gemini samples reality for feedback, grounding abstractions in lived data, and responding when action is required. Healthy, this supports adaptability and situational awareness. They are immutable temperament, so they can go with the flow when it comes to intellectualism, air, thinking, and communication. Hence sitting on the fence. Gemini's grounding function is SE expanded by Jupiter. This is how Gemini checks theories against reality, gathers live data, responds when action is unavoidable, and updates systems based on what actually happens. Jupiter enlarges SE's appetite for experience, ensuring Gemini does not remain purely abstract or managerial. It pushes Gemini into the world to test its insights. Healthy expression, situational awareness, adaptability, and practical responsiveness. Gemini adjusts fast when reality contradicts assumptions. Shadow expression under stress, SE and Jupiter can overload the system, producing reactivity, impatience, or temporary loss of strategic distance. Still, this function exists to answer one thing: does this work in practice? Now we have FI inferior value integration. Gemini struggles with personal conviction and hesitates to moralize prematurely. Values are learned through consequence rather than assertion. Healthy, this produces ethical restraint and humility. Shadow, it leads to moral silence or over tolerance of dysfunction. FI inferior and South Node, karmic value memory and moral restraint. Gemini's inferior function is FE paired with the South Node. This is critical. The South Node here represents prior moral experience, values learned through consequence, not ideology. Gemini carries memories of emotional fallout, moral overreach, identity based absolutism, and harm caused by premature conviction. As a result, Gemini does not moralize easily. FI develops slowly and cautiously. Gemini prefers to let values emerge after outcomes are observed, not before. Healthy expression, ethical restraint, humility, and refusal to weaponize values. Gemini avoids moral theater. Shadow expression, moral silence, over tolerance of dysfunction, or hesitation to assert boundaries when values do need to be enforced. So it means Gemini remembers what happens when values outrun structure. System summary, functional flow. NI and North Node sees where reality is going. TE and Mercury decides what must be built or corrected. SE and Jupiter verifies reality in motion. FI and South Node integrates meaning cautiously. Gemini thrives when future insight is allowed to shape present structure. Truth is acted upon responsibly. Values are grounded in consequence. Gemini collapses when insight is seen but never executed. Systems fail faster than authority can respond. Integrated role, the payoff. An integrated Gemini is not scattered, clever, or performative. It is diagnostic, executive, and stabilizing. At its highest expression, Gemini becomes the strategist who translates insight into structure, the communicator who enforces coherence, the bridge between foresight and implementation. Simply put, Gemini turns understanding into operational reality without distortion. Gemini isn't confused, they're waiting for the data to stop lying. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe. Feel free to put your comments down below. Keep it mature, please, and I will see you in the next video.